The morning sun cast long shadows across Windsor Castle's ancient stones as Sophie Wessex adjusted her coat against the crisp autumn air. She had no idea that in just a few hours, her simple gesture of loyalty would spark a conversation heard around the world. Standing beside her husband, Prince Edward, she was about to share words about Queen Elizabeth II that would reveal the intimate, human side of Britain's longest-reigning monarch. Words that would make millions see their queen not as a distant figure on coins and stamps, but as the remarkable woman who had quietly shaped their lives for over 7 decades. What Sophie said that day outside Windsor Castle would become one of the most touching tributes ever spoken about the Queen, capturing hearts across the globe and showing why even those closest to the throne couldn't help but marvel at the extraordinary woman they called family. This is the true story of that unforgettable moment and the remarkable relationship between a countess, a prince, and the Queen who amazed them every single day. The early morning mist clung to the grounds of Windsor Castle like a soft blanket, creating an almost magical atmosphere around the ancient fortress that had been home to British royalty for nearly 1,000 years. Sophie, Countess of Wessex, stepped carefully along the cobblestones, her heels clicking softly against the worn stones that had witnessed centuries of royal history. The autumn air was crisp and clean, carrying with it the scent of fallen leaves and the distant aroma of breakfast being prepared in the castle kitchens. Prince Edward walked beside his wife, his hands clasped behind his back in a gesture that reminded Sophie of his mother. Even in casual moments like this, there was something unmistakably royal about his posture, though his face carried the relaxed expression of a man enjoying a peaceful morning with his family. They had spent the weekend at Windsor, something that had become increasingly precious to them as the years passed, and their royal duties grew more demanding. The couple had been married for over 2 decades, and Sophie often marveled at how natural her life within the royal family had become. When she first met Edward at a tennis event in the late 1980s, she never could have imagined that one day she would be walking through the private grounds of Windsor Castle as a member of the House of Windsor. Back then, she was Sophie Rhys-Jones, a young woman working in public relations, living an ordinary life in London and dreaming of building her career in communications. Their courtship had been different from the media circus that surrounded other royal relationships. Edward, the youngest of Queen Elizabeth's 4 children, had always been more private, more reserved than his brothers Charles and Andrew or his sister Anne. He preferred quiet evenings and intimate gatherings to grand public events, though he understood the importance of his royal role. Sophie appreciated this about him from the beginning. She saw in him a man who valued genuine connection over superficial glamour. As they walked that morning, Sophie found herself thinking about the previous evening's dinner. It had been a small family gathering, just the Queen, Prince Philip, Edward, Sophie, and their 2 children, Lady Louise and James. These intimate moments had become increasingly rare and precious, especially as Prince Philip's health had begun to decline and the demands of royal life seemed to grow ever more complex. The Queen had been in particularly good spirits during dinner, sharing stories about her recent engagements and asking detailed questions about Edward and Sophie's charitable work. Sophie had always been struck by how interested the Queen was in every aspect of their activities, remembering small details about organizations they supported and people they had met. It wasn't the polite interest of someone making conversation. It was the genuine curiosity of a woman who truly cared about the work being done in her name. During dinner, the Queen had mentioned a letter she had received from a young girl in Scotland who had written to thank her for visiting her school the previous year. The Queen remembered not just the visit, but specific details about the girl's presentation and her hopes to become a teacher. Sophie watched as the Queen's eyes lit up while recounting the story, seeing the joy that these personal connections brought to a woman who had spent her entire adult life in service to others. After dinner, they had all gathered in one of Windsor's smaller sitting rooms, a space that felt more like a family living room than a room in a palace. The Queen had asked Louise about her art classes and listened intently as the teenage girl described her latest project. Sophie observed the way the Queen engaged with her granddaughter, not as the sovereign of the United Kingdom, but simply as a loving grandmother interested in her grandchild's passions and dreams. Prince Philip, despite his age and some recent health challenges, had regaled them with stories from his naval days, his eyes twinkling with mischief as he recounted adventures from decades past. The Queen would occasionally interrupt to correct small details or add her own perspective, and Sophie could see the deep affection and partnership that had sustained their marriage for over 7 decades. James, their son, had been quieter during the evening, but Sophie noticed how the Queen made special efforts to include him in conversations, asking about his interests and encouraging him to share his thoughts. The Queen had a remarkable gift for making each person feel seen and heard, regardless of their age or status. As the evening wound down, Sophie had found herself in a brief private conversation with the Queen. They had been discussing Sophie's work with various charities, particularly her efforts to support people with learning disabilities and her advocacy for preventing blindness in developing countries. The Queen had listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions and offering insights from her own decades of charitable work. What struck Sophie most about that conversation was the Queen's genuine humility. Despite being one of the most experienced charitable patrons in the world, the Queen spoke as if she was still learning, still discovering new ways to make a meaningful difference. She asked Sophie about the challenges she faced in her work and seemed genuinely interested in learning from Sophie's experiences. Now, walking through the castle grounds in the morning light, Sophie reflected on how that conversation exemplified everything she had come to admire about the Queen. Here was a woman who had been served by millions, who commanded the respect of world leaders, who had guided a nation through decades of change and challenge. Yet she approached every interaction with curiosity, kindness, and genuine interest in others. Edward squeezed her hand gently as they walked, and Sophie realized she had been quiet for several minutes, lost in her thoughts about the previous evening. He smiled at her, understanding without words that she was processing something meaningful. This understanding between them had developed over their years of marriage, strengthened by their shared commitment to their royal duties and their deep respect for the institution they served. They paused near a bench that overlooked the Long Walk, the famous tree-lined avenue that stretched for miles from Windsor Castle. Sophie had walked this path many times over the years, but she never tired of its beauty or its sense of history. She thought about all the royal figures who had walked these same paths, the countless conversations that had taken place in these gardens, the decisions that had shaped the nation that had been made within these walls. The morning sun was growing stronger now, burning away the last of the mist and revealing the full grandeur of the castle grounds. Sophie could see gardeners in the distance, already at work, maintaining the meticulous landscaping that made Windsor one of the most beautiful royal residences in the world. Their dedication reminded her of the hundreds of people who worked behind the scenes to support the royal family, each one playing a vital role in maintaining the traditions and responsibilities of the monarchy. Edward pointed out a family of deer grazing near the edge of the woods, and they stood in comfortable silence watching the graceful animals. Sophie thought about how these peaceful moments were what she treasured most about their life together. Despite the public duties, the formal ceremonies, and the constant awareness of their roles as representatives of the crown, moments like these reminded her that at its heart, their life was about family, love, and service. As they began walking back toward the castle, Sophie felt a deep sense of gratitude for the path that had led her to this life. It hadn't always been easy. The scrutiny of the press, the weight of public expectation, and the challenges of raising children in the public, I had all tested her strength and resolve. But moments like last night's dinner and this morning's peaceful walk reminded her why she had chosen this path and why she felt so honored to serve alongside Edward and the rest of the royal family. The Queen's example had been instrumental in helping Sophie navigate the complexities of royal life. The Queen's grace under pressure, her unwavering sense of duty, and her ability to find joy in service had inspired Sophie to approach her own role with similar dedication and humility. Sophie had learned from watching the Queen that true leadership wasn't about commanding attention or demanding respect, but about quietly serving others and finding fulfillment in making a positive difference in people's lives. As they approached the castle, Sophie could see staff members beginning their daily routines, preparing for another day of royal activities and obligations. Soon, their peaceful morning would give way to meetings, engagements, and the various responsibilities that came with their royal roles. But Sophie felt ready for whatever the day might bring, strengthened by the quiet moments she had shared with Edward and inspired by the example of service and dedication that the Queen embodied every single day. The breakfast room at Windsor Castle was filled with warm morning light streaming through tall windows that offered views of the carefully maintained gardens beyond. Sophie sat across from Edward at a polished wooden table that had seen countless royal meals over the decades. The room itself struck a perfect balance between grandeur and comfort, with its rich tapestries and elegant furnishings creating an atmosphere that felt both regal and welcoming. The Queen entered the breakfast room precisely at 8 o'clock, as was her custom. Sophie had learned over the years that the Queen maintained incredibly precise routines, not out of rigid formality, but because she understood that structure and consistency allowed her to manage the enormous scope of her responsibilities effectively. Every minute of the Queen's day was carefully planned, yet she somehow always seemed to have time for the unexpected conversation or the unscheduled moment of connection. "Good morning, Sophie." "Edward," the Queen said warmly, settling in her chair with the fluid grace that came from decades of formal dining. Despite being well in her 90s, the Queen moved with purpose and energy that continued to amaze everyone around her. Sophie had often marveled at the Queen's stamina and mental sharpness, qualities that had allowed her to remain actively engaged in her royal duties long past the age when most people would have retired. Prince Philip joined them a few minutes later, moving more slowly than in years past, but still displaying the upright bearing and alert expression that had characterized his long life of service. Sophie enjoyed these breakfast conversations immensely, as they provided rare opportunities to see the royal family in their most natural state, away from the formal protocols that governed their public appearances. The conversation over breakfast ranged from family matters to current events, with the Queen demonstrating the breadth of knowledge and genuine curiosity that had made her such an effective head of state for so many decades. She asked Edward about his upcoming engagements with the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme, showing detailed knowledge of the program's recent developments and expressing particular interest in initiatives aimed at helping young people develop confidence and leadership skills. Sophie shared updates about her work with various charitable organizations, and the Queen listened with the focused attention she brought to every conversation. When Sophie mentioned a recent visit to a facility for people with learning disabilities, the Queen asked specific questions about the challenges those individuals faced and the ways that charitable support was making a difference in their lives. What impressed Sophie most about these conversations was the Queen's ability to remember details from previous discussions and follow up on issues that had been raised weeks or even months earlier. The Queen had an extraordinary memory for people and their concerns, a quality that Sophie recognized as one of the keys to her effectiveness as a monarch. The Queen didn't just meet people and move on. She genuinely cared about their welfare and remembered their stories long after their brief encounters. As breakfast concluded, the Queen reviewed her schedule for the day with her private secretary, who had arrived with a leather folder containing the detailed itinerary that would guide every moment of the Queen's activities. Sophie observed this daily ritual with fascination, noting how the Queen approached each upcoming engagement with the same level of attention and preparation, whether it was a formal state function or a simple visit to a local community center. The morning's first official engagement was a meeting with representatives from several Commonwealth nations who were visiting to discuss trade and cultural exchange programs. Sophie knew that the Queen took particular pride in her role as head of the Commonwealth, viewing it as one of the most meaningful aspects of her responsibilities as monarch. The Queen often spoke about the Commonwealth as a family of nations bound together by shared values and mutual respect rather than by historical obligation. Edward and Sophie would be attending this meeting as well, as part of their ongoing education in the complexities of international relations and their preparation for taking on greater responsibilities as working members of the royal family. Sophie had found these diplomatic engagements increasingly fascinating as she learned more about the delicate balance of relationships that had to be maintained between nations with different interests and priorities. Before the meeting began, Sophie found herself in the Queen's private study, a room that reflected both the monarch's personal interests and her professional responsibilities. The walls were lined with books on history, politics, and international relations, along with personal photographs showing decades of royal family moments and meetings with world leaders. The Queen's desk was organized with military precision, with neat stacks of official papers, correspondence, and briefing documents arranged for easy access. The Queen was reviewing notes about each of the Commonwealth representatives she would be meeting, demonstrating the thorough preparation that she brought to every engagement. Sophie watched as the Queen studied detailed biographies and background information, noting personal details about each representative's family, interests, and previous interactions with the royal family. This level of preparation allowed the Queen to engage with each person on a personal level, creating connections that went far beyond formal diplomatic courtesy. "Sophie," the Queen said, looking up from her papers, "I'd like you to pay particular attention to the discussion about educational exchange programs. Your background in communications and your experience with young people through your charitable work might provide valuable insights." Sophie felt honored by the Queen's confidence in her abilities and recognized this as another example of how the Queen thoughtfully involved other family members in important discussions. The meeting itself was held in one of Windsor's elegant reception rooms, with representatives from Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and several African and Caribbean Commonwealth nations. Sophie observed how the Queen greeted each representative personally, demonstrating her remarkable memory for previous meetings and showing genuine interest in updates about their countries and their work. During the discussions, Sophie was struck by the respect and affection that the Commonwealth representatives showed for the Queen. These were accomplished leaders and diplomats in their own right, yet they clearly viewed the Queen not just as a ceremonial figure, but as a wise counselor whose experience and judgment they valued highly. The Queen's questions were thoughtful and well-informed, reflecting her deep understanding of each nation's unique challenges and opportunities. The conversation about educational exchanges was particularly engaging, with representatives sharing stories about young people who had benefited from programs that allowed them to study and work in other Commonwealth nations. Sophie contributed to this discussion, drawing on her experience with youth-focused charities to suggest ways that technology might be used to expand these opportunities to young people who might not otherwise be able to participate in international exchanges. The Queen listened to Sophie's suggestions with obvious interest, asking follow-up questions that demonstrated her quick understanding of the potential benefits and challenges involved. Sophie felt a surge of pride and confidence as she realized that her contributions were genuinely valued and that her perspective as a newer member of the royal family brought fresh insights to these important discussions. Following the formal meeting, the group moved to another room for tea and more informal conversation. Sophie observed how the Queen used these social moments to deepen her relationships with the representatives, asking about their families and sharing stories that revealed her own humanity and warmth. One representative mentioned that his daughter was studying veterinary medicine, and the Queen immediately connected this to her own love of animals and her extensive knowledge of horse breeding and care. These personal connections were clearly meaningful to the representatives, who often seemed surprised and delighted by the Queen's genuine interest in their lives beyond their professional roles. Sophie recognized this as another example of the Queen's exceptional ability to see each person as an individual with their own unique story and circumstances. As the afternoon progressed, Sophie found herself in several smaller conversations with different representatives, discussing everything from climate change initiatives to cultural preservation programs. She was impressed by the depth of knowledge and passion that these leaders brought to their work, and she felt privileged to be part of discussions that would influence policies affecting millions of people across the Commonwealth. The Queen moved effortlessly between these various conversations, demonstrating her skill at diplomatic engagement while also fulfilling her role as hostess. Sophie watched as the Queen managed to spend meaningful time with each representative while also keeping the overall flow of the event moving smoothly toward its conclusion. As the representatives prepared to leave, the Queen took a few moments to speak privately with each one, offering words of encouragement and support for their ongoing work. Sophie could see how much these personal moments meant to the visitors, who clearly valued the Queen's wisdom and experience as much as they appreciated the formal diplomatic courtesies. When the last representative had departed, the Queen turned to Edward and Sophie with a satisfied expression. "That went very well," she said, settling into a comfortable chair. "I'm particularly encouraged by the enthusiasm for the educational initiatives. I think there are real opportunities there to make a meaningful difference in young people's lives." Sophie felt a deep sense of satisfaction at having contributed meaningfully to such important discussions. She also felt grateful for the Queen's mentorship and guidance, recognizing how much she was learning about effective leadership through these opportunities to observe and participate in the Queen's work. The day was far from over, with several more engagements scheduled before evening, but Sophie felt energized rather than tired by the morning's activities. She was beginning to understand how the Queen maintained her enthusiasm for her duties despite their demanding nature. The work itself was deeply meaningful, and the opportunity to make a positive difference in people's lives provided a source of energy and motivation that sustained the Queen through even the most challenging days. The afternoon sun cast dancing shadows through the tall windows of Windsor Castle as Sophie walked alongside the Queen through corridors filled with centuries of royal history. They were making their way to the castle's library, where the Queen had scheduled a private meeting with historians who were working on documenting the monarchy's role in supporting scientific research and innovation over the past century. Sophie had been invited to attend this meeting because of her background in communications and her interest in how the royal family could better highlight their support for education and scientific advancement. As they walked, the Queen shared stories about various scientific breakthroughs that had received royal patronage over the years, from early computer technology to medical research that had improved countless lives. People often think of the monarchy as being focused only on tradition and ceremony, the Queen remarked as they passed portraits of previous monarchs. But we've always recognized that progress and innovation are essential for the nation's well-being. The key is finding ways to honor our heritage while embracing positive change. Sophie found this perspective fascinating, as it reflected something she had observed about the Queen's approach to virtually every aspect of her role. The Queen had an extraordinary ability to respect and preserve important traditions while also adapting to new circumstances and opportunities. This balance between continuity and change had been one of the defining characteristics of her long reign. The library itself was a magnificent space, with towering shelves filled with rare books and historical documents that chronicled centuries of British history. The historians who were waiting for them had laid out various photographs, letters, and documents that illustrated the royal family's long relationship with scientific institutions and researchers. Dr. Margaret Whitfield, a distinguished historian from Cambridge University, led the presentation. She had spent years researching the royal family's support for scientific advancement, uncovering stories that had never been widely publicized. Sophie was amazed to learn about the Queen's personal interest in technology and innovation, including her early adoption of email and her support for computer literacy programs in schools. Your Majesty's enthusiasm for new technology has been remarkable, Dr. Whitfield said, showing photographs of the Queen visiting computer laboratories and meeting with young programmers. Your willingness to embrace technological change has set an important example and has helped legitimize innovation in the eyes of the public. The Queen smiled at this observation, seeming pleased that her efforts have been noticed and documented. I've always believed that if we're going to serve the people effectively, we need to understand the tools and technologies that are shaping their lives, she said. How can we address their concerns or support their aspirations if we don't understand the world they're living in? Sophie was struck by this practical wisdom, recognizing it as another example of how the Queen approached her responsibilities with thoughtfulness and genuine care for the people she served. The Queen's curiosity about new developments wasn't just personal interest. It was a professional necessity that allowed her to remain relevant and effective in a rapidly changing world. Dr. Whitfield showed them letters from prominent scientists expressing gratitude for royal support of their research, along with photographs of the Queen visiting laboratories and research facilities across the United Kingdom. Sophie was particularly interested in images of the Queen meeting with young researchers, noting how genuinely engaged she appeared in their explanations of complex scientific concepts. The Queen has always had an exceptional ability to ask the right questions, Dr. Whitfield explained. Scientists often tell me that her visits push them to explain their work in clearer terms, which sometimes leads to new insights or better ways of communicating their findings to the public. This observation resonated deeply with Sophie, who had witnessed the Queen's gift for asking thoughtful questions that revealed important aspects of complex issues. The Queen's questions weren't just polite conversation. They demonstrated genuine understanding and often highlighted connections or implications that others might miss. The meeting continued with discussions about how the royal family support had helped various scientific institutions secure funding and public recognition for their work. Sophie learned about research programs in medicine, environmental science, and technology that had benefited from royal patronage, not just through financial support, but through the credibility and public attention that royal involvement brought to important but sometimes overlooked areas of study. As the historians packed up their materials, the Queen spent additional time reviewing some of the documents they had shared, occasionally making notes or asking for copies of particular items. Sophie observed how thoroughly the Queen engaged with information that interested her, taking time to understand details and implications rather than simply acknowledging the presentations and moving on. After the historians departed, the Queen invited Sophie to join her for tea in a smaller, more intimate sitting room. This was the kind of personal interaction that Sophie treasured most, as it provided opportunities for deeper conversations about their shared work and interests. I hope you found that presentation as fascinating as I did, the Queen said as they settled into comfortable chairs. I think there are tremendous opportunities for us to do more to highlight the importance of scientific research and to encourage young people to pursue careers in science and technology. Sophie agreed enthusiastically, sharing her own observations about the challenges that many young people faced in accessing quality education in science and mathematics. They discussed various charitable programs that were working to address these challenges, and Sophie was impressed by the Queen's detailed knowledge of specific initiatives and her thoughtful ideas about how royal support might be most effectively provided. The conversation gradually shifted to more personal topics, with the Queen asking about Sophie's own education and the experiences that had shaped her interests and career choices. Sophie found herself sharing stories about her early work in public relations, describing how she had learned to communicate complex information in ways that different audiences could understand and appreciate. That's exactly the kind of skill that's needed in royal work, the Queen observed. So much of what we do involves helping people understand complex issues and making connections between different groups and interests. Your professional background has prepared you well for these responsibilities. Sophie felt deeply honored by this acknowledgement, recognizing that the Queen's approval was based not on politeness, but on genuine assessment of her contributions and potential. The Queen was known for her direct and honest evaluations, making her praise particularly meaningful to those who received it. As their conversation continued, Sophie found herself sharing her thoughts about the challenges of balancing family life with royal duties. She spoke about her concerns for Louise and James, wanting to ensure that they had as normal a childhood as possible while also preparing them for their future roles as members of the royal family. The Queen listened with the understanding that came from having navigated these same challenges with her own children decades earlier. "It's not easy," the Queen acknowledged, "but I found that children are remarkably adaptable when they feel secure in their parents' love and when they understand that their family's work is meaningful and important." The Queen shared stories about raising Charles and Andrew and Edward, describing the various approaches she and Prince Philip had tried in their efforts to give their children both stability and preparation for their royal roles. Sophie was fascinated by these insights into the Queen's experiences as a mother, recognizing the unique challenges she had faced in balancing her duties as sovereign with her responsibilities as a parent. "The most important thing," the Queen continued, "is to help them understand that privilege comes with responsibility and that their opportunities should be used to serve others rather than simply to serve themselves. If they understand that principle, they'll find their way to meaningful contributions regardless of how their specific roles evolve." Sophie found this advice both practical and inspiring, recognizing the wisdom that came from the Queen's decades of experience in royal life. She thought about her own children and how she might apply these insights to help them develop their own sense of purpose and responsibility. As the afternoon drew toward evening, Sophie reflected on how much she had learned during this single day at Windsor Castle. From a morning's diplomatic meetings to the afternoon's discussions about scientific research, she had gained new appreciation for the complexity and importance of royal work. More than that, she had witnessed once again the Queen's extraordinary dedication to understanding and serving the needs of her people. The Queen's curiosity, wisdom, and genuine care for others have been evident in every interaction throughout the day. Whether she was discussing international relations with Commonwealth representatives or learning about scientific research from academic historians, the Queen approached each conversation with the same level of attention and respect for the people she was meeting and the issues they represented. Sophie felt grateful for these opportunities to observe and learn from the Queen's example, recognizing that she was receiving an education in leadership and service that could not be found anywhere else. The Queen's approach to her role was both inspiring and instructive, providing a model of dedicated service that Sophie hoped to emulate in her own royal work. As they prepared to join Edward and other family members for dinner, Sophie looked forward to sharing some of what she had learned during the day. She knew that Edward would be particularly interested in the discussions about supporting scientific research, as is connected to his own interests in education and youth development through the Duke of Edinburgh's award program. The day had reinforced Sophie's appreciation for the important work that the royal family accomplished behind the scenes, often without public recognition or fanfare. She had gained a deeper understanding of how royal influence could be used to support important causes and to bring attention and resources to issues that might otherwise be overlooked by policymakers and the media. As evening approached Windsor Castle, the ancient walls seemed to glow with warmth from the setting sun. Sophie found herself in the blue drawing room, one of the castle's most elegant spaces, where the family traditionally gathered before dinner when they were in residence. The room's rich blue silk wall coverings and magnificent chandelier created an atmosphere that was both formal and welcoming, perfectly reflecting the balance that the Queen had achieved throughout her reign between royal dignity and family comfort. Edward was already in the room when Sophie arrived, standing near one of the tall windows and looking out at the gardens where they had walked that morning. The day felt much longer than just the few hours that had actually passed since their peaceful morning stroll. So much had they experienced and learned during their time at Windsor. "How was your afternoon with Mother?" Edward asked as Sophie joined him by the window. He had spent his own afternoon working on correspondence and reviewing plans for upcoming engagements with the Duke of Edinburgh's award, but He was always eager to hear about Sophie's interactions with other members of the family, particularly the Queen. Sophie described the fascinating meeting with the historians and her subsequent private conversation with the Queen, sharing her amazement at the breadth of the Queen's knowledge and her genuine engagement with complex issues. She asked questions that I never would have thought to ask, Sophie told Edward. It's like she has this ability to see connections and implications that aren't obvious to the rest of us. Edward smiled knowingly. I've watched her do that my entire life, he said. When I was younger, I sometimes thought she was just being polite when she asked all those detailed questions during official visits. It wasn't until I started accompanying her on engagements that I realized how much thought and preparation went into every conversation she had. They were joined a few minutes later by Lady Louise and James, who had spent their afternoon with tutors, but were excited to join the family for the evening. Sophie enjoyed watching the Queen interact with her grandchildren during these casual family moments, seeing how she balanced her role as sovereign with her genuine affection for the young people who represented the future of the royal family. Louise, now a teenager with artistic talents and a quiet but thoughtful personality, often engaged the Queen in conversations about art and history. Sophie had observed how the Queen encouraged Louise's interests while also helping her understand the ways that creativity and public service could be combined in meaningful ways. James, younger but equally thoughtful, tended to be more interested in outdoor activities and sports. The Queen had always shown particular skill in connecting with children through their own interests, and Sophie had watched with admiration as the Queen discussed everything from rugby to wildlife conservation with James, always finding ways to relate his enthusiasms to broader lessons about responsibility and service. Prince Philip arrived in the drawing room, moving more slowly than in years past, but still displaying the alert expression and dry wit that had made him such an effective partner to the Queen throughout their long marriage. Sophie had developed deep respect for Prince Philip over the years, recognizing his important role in supporting the Queen and his significant contributions to various charitable causes, particularly those focused on young people and environmental conservation. I hear you had quite an educational day, Prince Philip said to Sophie with a slight smile. Margaret can be quite overwhelming when she gets started on the subject of royal support for science. I hope she didn't bury you in too much historical detail. Sophie laughed, appreciating Prince Philip's ability to inject humor into conversations while still acknowledging the importance of serious topics. Actually, I found it fascinating, she replied. I had no idea how much the royal family had done to support scientific research over the years. Some of those stories should be better known by the public. That's exactly what I think, the Queen said as she entered the room, having changed into more casual attire for the family dinner. We've often been hesitant to publicize our support for various causes because we don't want to appear to be seeking credit for what should be quiet service. But I'm beginning to think that sharing these stories might actually encourage others to support important research and innovation. This observation led to an engaging family discussion about the balance between maintaining appropriate modesty about royal charitable work and providing public examples that might inspire others to contribute to important causes. Edward shared his experiences with the Duke of Edinburgh's award, describing how public recognition of young people's achievements had motivated many others to participate in the program. Louise contributed her own perspective, suggesting that social media and modern communication tools might provide new ways for the royal family to highlight important causes without appearing to seek personal recognition. Sophie was impressed by Louise's thoughtful approach to these complex issues, seeing evidence of the Queen's influence in helping the younger generation understand their potential role in serving the public good. As they moved into the smaller family dining room for dinner, the conversation continued to explore various aspects of royal service and public engagement. Sophie found these family discussions incredibly valuable, as they provided insights into how the royal family thought about their roles and responsibilities in a rapidly changing world. The dinner itself was more casual than formal royal meals, with family members serving themselves and engaging in the kind of relaxed conversation that any family might enjoy together. Sophie had come to treasure these moments, which reminded her that despite their unique circumstances and responsibilities, the royal family was fundamentally a group of people who cared deeply about each other and shared common values of service and dedication. During dinner, the Queen asked James about his upcoming school projects, listening with genuine interest as he described a research assignment about wildlife conservation. Sophie watched as the Queen asked thoughtful questions that helped James think more deeply about the environmental challenges facing wildlife and the various approaches that conservationists were taking to address these problems. The Queen said to James, "We have several organizations working on wildlife conservation that might be interested in your research. Perhaps we could arrange for you to visit one of their facilities and see their work firsthand." James's eyes lit up with excitement at this suggestion, and Sophie appreciated once again the Queen's ability to connect educational opportunities with real-world learning experiences. The conversation then shifted to Louise's art studies, with the Queen inquiring about her latest projects and encouraging her to think about ways that art could be used to support charitable causes or to bring attention to important social issues. Sophie had observed how the Queen consistently helped her grandchildren see connections between their personal interests and their potential for public service. As dinner concluded, Prince Philip shared stories from his afternoon of correspondence, including letters from young people who had participated in his Duke of Edinburgh's award program over the years. "It's remarkable," he said, "how many of these young people write to say that the program changed their lives, gave them confidence they didn't know they had, or helped them discover interests and abilities they never knew existed." Sophie found these stories deeply moving, recognizing the profound impact that royal programs and initiatives had on individual lives across the United Kingdom and throughout the Commonwealth. She was beginning to understand more fully how the royal family's work extended far beyond ceremonial functions to include meaningful contributions to education, charitable work, and social development. Following dinner, the family gathered in a comfortable sitting room where the Queen typically spent her evenings reading, corresponding, or working on official papers. Tonight, however, she seemed more interested in continuing their family conversations than in attending to formal duties. The Queen asked Sophie about her plans for upcoming charitable engagements, showing particular interest in Sophie's work with organizations supporting people with learning disabilities. "I think that's such important work," the Queen said. "These are often people whose contributions to society aren't fully recognized or appreciated, yet they have so much to offer when they're given appropriate support and opportunities." Sophie shared stories about some of the individuals she had met through her charitable work, describing their resilience, creativity, and determination to contribute meaningfully to their communities despite the challenges they faced. The Queen listened with obvious compassion and interest, occasionally asking questions that demonstrated her understanding of the complex issues involved. "I think people would be inspired if they could hear some of these stories," the Queen observed. "There's so much focus on problems and difficulties in news, but there are also remarkable examples of people overcoming challenges and making positive differences in their communities. Perhaps we could find ways to highlight some of these success stories." This suggestion led to an extended discussion about how the royal family might better use their platform to share positive examples and inspiring stories while still maintaining their traditional role of political neutrality. Sophie contributed ideas based on her professional background in communications, suggesting approaches that could highlight important issues and inspiring individuals without appearing to advocate for specific political solutions. As the evening drew to a close, Sophie reflected on how much she had learned during this single day at Windsor Castle. From the morning's diplomatic meetings to the afternoon's historical research to the evening's family discussions, she had gained new insights into the complexity and importance of royal work. More than that, she had been inspired once again by the Queen's example of thoughtful, dedicated service. The Queen's curiosity, wisdom, and genuine care for others have been evident in every interaction throughout the day, providing a model of leadership that Sophie hoped to emulate in her own royal duties. Walking back to their rooms with Edward later that evening, Sophie found herself thinking about the remarkable woman who had guided the royal family and the nation with such skill and grace for so many decades. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight she felt grateful for the privilege of serving alongside such an extraordinary example of dedication and service. The next morning dawned crisp and clear at Windsor Castle, with autumn sunlight streaming across the ancient grounds and creating the perfect backdrop for what would become one of the most memorable moments in Sophie and Edward's royal service. They had awakened early, as was their custom when staying at Windsor, and had joined the Queen for breakfast before beginning what appeared to be a routine day of royal engagements. The Queen had seemed particularly energetic during breakfast, discussing her upcoming meetings with enthusiasm and demonstrating the sharp mental acuity that continued to amaze everyone around her. At 96 years old, she maintained a schedule that would challenge people half her age, yet she approached each day with the same dedication and optimism that had characterized her entire reign. "I'm looking forward to this morning's visit to the local primary school," the Queen had said over breakfast. "I always enjoy meeting young children and hearing about their dreams and aspirations. They have such wonderful perspectives on the world, and they're not afraid to ask the most interesting questions." Sophie and Edward were scheduled to accompany the Queen on several engagements that day, including the school visit and an afternoon reception for community leaders. These types of local engagements were among Sophie's favorites, as they provided opportunities to meet ordinary citizens and learn about their concerns and achievements. As they prepared to leave Windsor Castle for their first engagement, Sophie found herself thinking about the previous day's conversations and the insights she had gained about the Queen's approach to royal service. The Queen's genuine curiosity about people and her ability to connect with individuals from all walks of life had been evident in every interaction, reinforcing Sophie's admiration for the woman who had dedicated her entire adult life to serving others. The morning's first stop was the primary school, where the Queen was greeted with tremendous excitement by children who had been preparing for her visit for weeks. Sophie watched with delight as the Queen moved through the classrooms, genuinely engaging with the young students and showing sincere interest in their projects and presentations. In one classroom, the children had prepared a special display about the Commonwealth, with each child having researched a different member nation and created colorful presentations about their chosen countries. The Queen spent considerable time reviewing each presentation, asking thoughtful questions that encouraged the children to share what they had learned and express their own thoughts about different cultures and traditions. Sophie was particularly struck by the Queen's interaction with a young girl named Emma, who had prepared a presentation about Canada and had included information about the Queen's role as head of the Commonwealth. "Your Majesty," Emma asked with the direct honesty that only children possess, "do you ever get tired of being the Queen?" The Queen paused thoughtfully before answering, and Sophie could see the genuine consideration she was giving to this innocent but profound question. "Sometimes the work is challenging," the Queen replied, "but I never get tired of meeting wonderful people like you and learning about the amazing things that people accomplish when they work together to help their communities." This simple but heartfelt response perfectly captured what Sophie had come to understand about the Queen's approach to her role. Despite the enormous responsibilities and constant demands on her time, the Queen found genuine energy and satisfaction in connecting with people and supporting their efforts to make positive differences in their communities. Following the school visit, they returned to Windsor Castle for a brief respite before the afternoon's reception. During this break, Sophie found herself in conversation with several members of the Queen's staff, who shared stories about their experiences working for the monarch over the years. "She never stops learning," said one long-serving private secretary. "Even after all these decades in the role, she approaches each new situation with curiosity and wants to understand all the details before making decisions. It's remarkable to watch someone who could easily rely on experience and protocol instead choose to engage deeply with new information and perspectives." These observations reinforce Sophie's own impressions of the Queen's character and approach to leadership. The Queen's willingness to continue learning and growing even after decades of experience, provided an inspiring example of intellectual humility and genuine commitment to effective service. The afternoon reception was held in one of Windsor's grand staterooms, with community leaders from across the region gathering to meet the Queen and share information about their various initiatives and achievements. Sophie and Edward circulated among the guests, engaging in conversations about local issues and learning about the creative approaches that different organizations were taking to address community challenges. Sophie found herself in an extended conversation with a group of volunteers who had organized a program to support elderly residents during the pandemic. Their stories of dedication and innovation were deeply moving, and Sophie was struck by the way these ordinary citizens had stepped up to provide extraordinary service during a time of crisis. "It's people like you who make me proud to serve this country," Sophie told one of the volunteers, meaning every word. "Your willingness to help your neighbors and your creative approaches to solving problems represent the very best of what our communities can accomplish." As the reception continued, Sophie observed the Queen moving through the crowd with her characteristic grace and genuine interest in each person she met. Despite having attended thousands of similar events over her long reign, the Queen approached each conversation as if it were the first time she had heard about the issues being discussed. It was during one of these conversations that Sophie witnessed a moment that would stay with her forever. The Queen was speaking with an elderly gentleman who had organized a program to teach reading skills to adult learners in his community. As he described the challenges that many adults faced in developing literacy skills later in life, the Queen listened with obvious compassion and interest. "You know," the Queen said to the gentleman, "one of the things that has always amazed me about the British people is their determination to keep learning and growing throughout their lives. The courage it takes for an adult to admit they need help with reading and then to seek out that help is truly admirable. Your program is providing not just education, but hope and dignity." Sophie felt tears welling up in her eyes as she listened to this exchange, moved by the Queen's ability to recognize and honor the courage and determination of ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges. This was the essence of what made the Queen so remarkable, her ability to see the nobility in every person's struggles and achievements. As the reception drew to a close, Sophie found herself standing with Edward near the entrance to the stateroom, saying goodbye to departing guests. Many of the community leaders took time to express their gratitude not just for the Queen's attention to their work, but for the way she had made them feel valued and important. "She really listened," one guest said to Sophie. "I've met other important people who were obviously just going through the motions, but the Queen genuinely cared about what we were trying to accomplish. That means everything to people like us who are just trying to make a difference in our small corner of the world." When the last guest had departed, Sophie and Edward found themselves alone with the Queen for a few moments before she departed for her next engagement. The Queen looked tired but satisfied, clearly energized by the connection she had made and the stories she had heard. "Days like this remind me why I love this work," the Queen said, settling into a chair for a brief rest. "Meeting people who are making such positive differences in their communities, seeing the creativity and dedication they bring to solving problems, it's truly inspiring." Sophie felt compelled to speak, sensing that this might be an important moment to express what was in her heart. "Your Majesty," she began, "I hope you know how amazing you are. Watching you today, seeing how you connect with people and make them feel valued and important, it's extraordinary. You inspire all of us to be better servants and better people." The Queen looked touched by Sophie's words, and Edward nodded in agreement. "Sophie's absolutely right, Mother," he said. "Your example of service and dedication has shaped all of our lives, and I think people across the nation and throughout the Commonwealth feel the same way." "You're both very kind," the Queen replied, "but I think the amazing people are the ones we met today. I'm just privileged to have the opportunity to meet them and to support their important work in whatever small way I can." This response was so characteristically humble and thoughtful that Sophie felt overwhelmed with admiration and affection for this remarkable woman who had dedicated her entire life to serving others. As they walked together toward the castle's entrance, where the Queen's car was waiting for her next engagement, Sophie knew that she had witnessed something special. Standing outside Windsor Castle as the Queen's car disappeared down the long driveway, Sophie turned to Edward with tears of admiration in her eyes. "She truly is amazing," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "Everything she does, every person she meets, she brings such dignity and compassion to her role. We're so fortunate to serve alongside someone who sets such an extraordinary example." Edward took his wife's hand, understanding completely the emotions that were overwhelming her. "I've watched her my entire life," he said, "and I'm still amazed by her dedication and her ability to find joy and meaning in serving others. She really is the most remarkable person I've ever known." As they stood together in the golden afternoon light, Sophie realized that this moment, this expression of admiration and love for the Queen, was something she would treasure forever. The words she had spoken came from the deepest place in her heart, and she knew that anyone who had the privilege of knowing the Queen would understand exactly what she meant. The Queen was indeed amazing, not because of the crown she wore or the palace she lived in, but because of the compassion, wisdom, and unwavering dedication she brought to every moment of her remarkable life of service. Sophie felt honored to be part of the royal family and grateful for the opportunity to learn from and serve alongside such an extraordinary example of leadership and grace.